Hey, what's up? Well, I have gotten what I'm always longing to have, which is lots of time alone to make a video. Yay! And I'm dressed a little differently today. I'm wearing butterflies and my Texas shirt that says God bless Texas. I'm not gonna, you know, model it, but I'm not gonna tell you where I live, but it's not Texas. And it makes me feel really cool. It was nice enough to have Texas stuff when I actually lived in Texas. Now that I'm not in Texas, makes me feel special and kind of elite, to be wearing stuff that says Texas. Because it's like to say that I'm not from here and I'm proud of it. And I don't know if you heard the audio well enough, or I didn't go in enough detail in my last video about what I had bought. And it's this doll that she's a Skipper clone. And I was talking about it's very infuriating to look back in time, because I've often, I wish I could have a time machine back to, you know just a few years back. And things were just so much cooler in the past. And I wish I could go back in a time machine and go on a shopping spree and come back to the future, like the movie, with a whole bunch of stuff bought in the 90s, back when things were not only cheaper, but in some cases more abundant or readily available, for the simple reason that, the law of supply and demand says that things will become unavailable as they are no longer in demand. And I hate how capitalism just infiltrates everything. Yeah, everything is just determined by capitalism, as to whether or not it can be done or made or available. You know what I'm saying? And I hate this idea that if people are willing to buy something, then it's okay. That if something, even if something is immoral, if people are willing to buy it, that it should be there. And although I benefit from that in some ways, I've been listening to this guy called Middle Nation. And he's very interesting. I'm just always, 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 always looking for, people with thought-provoking content, and I'm very interested in like religious people. And although, obviously I have my own faith, I'm not going to want to convert to Islam or become this denomination, that denomination, when I'm not and wasn't raised that way. Just like with Pastor Anderson, he wants a very strict, fundamental Baptist denomination. He wants pretty much everybody to be a fundamental Baptist or they're wrong and going to hell or whatnot. And while I do not believe that, I don't want to adopt a lifestyle wherein women don't wear pants and they can't vote and, it's pro-life in every way, including like birth control, because it just sounds too much like wanting to control women, more than wanting to save babies. When you get to the point where, in the first 2 weeks, the fetus is just as important as an adult human. Come on, that's wanting to control women with fetuses. It's not pro-life. That's, I want to hurt women. Because if you really cared about life, you would want to improve the quality of their lives. And since you're not going to be adopting those kids, that you force women to have, when they can't afford them and don't want them, more importantly, when you're not going to be changing their diapers and making sure horrible things that I won't go into are not being done to them as a punishment, for even needing them in the first place. Um, just like when you're not going to come to my house and unclog my drain, if I grow my hair 2 feet long, like longer than hers, and it falls out, they don't get a vote. you know they're not the ones that are going to have to deal with the consequences of implementing the things that they want, such as abortion bans, such as forcing women to wear long hair, and so on. And if I believe that colds were from being cold, it would be very infuriating to think that they want women to wear dresses, because the dresses that are available in the stores today don't look like this. And it would be very cold in the winter. And no, I don't have a cold. I've just been doing yard work like crazy. And so, it's just infuriating, these people that want, especially men, they want to have a world wherein everyone is forced to do these things this certain way, but at the same time, they're not exactly wanting to help deal with or mitigate the consequences that would cause other people. Oh, and here's my shoes. I have to look through those shoes and see if, there's not some that would be better for some of these dolls. But, so yeah, it's like they don't get a vote, they don't get a say, but at the same time, it is very interesting to listen to such people, like the Muslim guy, Middle Nation. I have no interest in learning the Quran or following Islam, but it is very interesting to hear, some of what he has to say, and how, a lot of things about how America has, the wrong idea, that they think that all opinions are equally valid, and that capitalism, if something can be justified with capitalism, if people are willing to buy something, that our true religion in America is capitalism, not Christianity. And it's so true. We're not communist, we're not Christian, we're capitalist, first and foremost. And I believe that, that is, it's the love of money. And I believe that everything that's wrong in America got that way because we decided to worship money rather than God. And that's the reason why, you have so many things that shouldn't be going on but are, such as like this whole transgender thing. I mean, why is that happening? Why did that start? Because somebody somewhere decided that it didn't matter how immoral it was, to do these procedures to people, basically exploiting the mentally ill, which I've had a recent shock in that insurance companies are wanting to deny me because I've had a history of depression and suicidality in the past, while I'm not that way today. The fact that I ever was that way means insurance companies don't want to provide me health insurance because they think I'm going to kill myself or something. I don't know. But you're exploiting the mentally ill for a profit. And so because somebody can make money off of it, they think it's acceptable to do these things to people, this sex change industry, which is what it is, and you're not allowed to speak out against it. And same thing with everything else that's wrong in the world. The whole gay pride thing, because gay people have a lot of buying power and, have for a long time, especially gay men, that makes it okay to have such things, in media, and, just the whole pride thing, they think that it's okay to do something as long as you can make a profit off of it. That the profit justifies doing it, women being scantily clad, and the whole beauty industry, burqas and hijabs or whatever, would make it to where the beauty industry would be obsolete and girls wouldn't have all these eating disorders and be obsessed with their bodies, and they wouldn't, you know, you wouldn't have this growing percentage that are obsessed with becoming boys or men if we could actually hide our bodies in something that would cover us up. You know what I'm saying? And in the days when girls dressed more like this, you know, they didn't have to be so self-conscious about their bodies. You know, when the style wasn't to wear freaking leggings or tights with nothing over them and a tight form-fitting skimpy blouse, you know, girls were not so obsessed with starving themselves and or wanting to be male. You know what I'm saying? When their bodies weren't just on display like that. Um, you know, so while I do agree with the modesty thing, you know, I may not agree with, you know, the extent of it, you know, like having to cover everything except, you know, basically, you know, a little bit of your face. I don't agree with that. Just like I don't agree with Pastor Anderson, you know, and a lot of what he says, you know, especially women, you know, because I'm just too far, I guess, too far along on the feminist path to ever, you know, see myself as someone who should be at home having kids. Because for one thing, it's too late. You know, for another thing, I never truly identified with that role. So it would have never benefited me. So anyway, it's interesting to hear, you know, and there was a time, I mean, the Christianity that the Puritans wanted or had in America was not, in some ways, it was very similar to Islam. May not have been Allah and Muhammad and all that, but the ancient Christianity was, you know, or at least the Protestant form of it, you know, that started America, it was very similar, you know, in the way that they're rejecting a lot of Catholicism and they did not like to draw pictures of Jesus, and they were very modest, you know, drinking was supposedly wrong, theoretically, and just certain things, you know, that people have come to accept as just, you know, the culture now that we've gotten away from Christianity. Well, it used to be much more like, you know, what Middle Nation is describing of Islam, you know, a very, like, or I think it was, I wouldn't know because I wasn't around then, but it was more like, you know, it was much more about morals, you know. And as we've gotten away from that, I feel like it's brought about negative changes. Um, but back to what I was saying about how, you know, the world used to not suck as much in the 90s. And before, you know, before the 90s, it sucked even less and less and less, and so on. I mean, there were just so many things that we've lost. And I feel like it is a result of sin because, you know, the Bible teaches that sin brings about bondage, not freedom. And you lose things, you know, as sin becomes more widely accepted. And it takes a while to see exactly what those things are. But one thing, you know, I just wish I could go back in time, you know, in time machine, you know, just to within my lifetime, even, you know, even just to times that I have lived through, and go back in time with a shopping bag and just buy things that used to exist. You know, I feel like eBay is the closest thing I have to that. Just buy things that used to be readily available at the store but have stopped being that way. And a lot of it is because of the unintended consequences of what these ideologies have done. You know, in the days before, you know, homosexuality was just so widely celebrated and known, um, it's like, I feel like, you know, there's always a backlash against these things. And so, as much as, you know, I like what feminism has brought, you know, a lot of the things that we've gained from feminism, at the same time, there's also been a backlash from feminism that we didn't predict, and how women are being hurt, you know, in other ways because we don't, want to be like in the kitchen and, you know, having that outdated role. Men are finding other ways to hurt us and to set us back, using other things, like the beauty industry, for example, since they can't force us, to wear these restrictive clothing anymore, where they're gonna um, do a 180 and try to make us feel like we're crap, if we don't measure up to a ridiculous standard of beauty, which always seems to include light eyes, and people can't do anything about that if they don't have it, other than those fake looking contacts. So anyway, I feel like we've lost a lot, through the acceptance of the mainstreaming of things like homosexuality and transgenderism. Um, and I'm finding out, that, it's infuriating. Another thing I've been gaslit about, and one of the many things I've been gaslit about in my life, is that I didn't have a lot of dolls growing up because there weren't as many dolls, when I was little in the 80s and 90s. Well, bull effing shit, because there were. Okay, eBay can prove that that is wrong. There were plenty of dolls. There were Moon Dreamers. There were Babysitters Club dolls, which I forgot to mention. They were in between the size of Kelly and Stacy, which I wish I'd known about. They were kind of like a Chelsea doll, before there ever was one, the little kids. And the older girls were like a Skipper doll. There were all kinds of dolls that I never see, because what my mom and my sister, well, she didn't even exist, for much of this, and she was a baby for the rest of it. What my mom fails to acknowledge, because everybody, has just been in denial, that it isn't just me wanting to be a boy, it's me genuinely having kind of a boy brain, so to speak. Me genuinely, as a child, just not being programmed for whatever reason to be drawn to things that were hot pink and glittery and, Barbie type things. I threw a fit about being forced to have things that were, like I just described, pink and feminine. I threw a fit about not wanting to have such things. But when I was a child, I was not drawn to the Barbie aisle. And entire shopping trips could go by for me, when I was younger. And I didn't even ask to go down the doll aisle. And I didn't really discover Barbie, until I was older. And, people started, I want to say, like I've stated before, I only had 3 Barbies, 3 Kens, and 3 what I call kids. The Ariel doll, Todd, and that little kid core, I called her Lisa, but I think she was really Carla. She's like a Katie doll who was slightly younger. But I only had 9 dolls total like that. And not all of them were even Mattel. 2 of them, I guess, weren't even Mattel. So only 7 dolls from my childhood that were Mattel Barbie scale dolls. And so I was not drawn to things like that. And so I did not even know about them in childhood or at the time when they were in the store, because I simply wasn't into it when I was the right age to play with them. And then my sister comes along and she has a huge collection of that, because she is more like a typical girl, not because there's more of that stuff available at the store. So anyway, I am finding out that there were more, I wouldn't say Todd dolls, but like little boy dolls about 7 inches, more than I realized. And in 1994, there was kind of a live action Flintstone movie. Every few years they try to revive a cartoon series, which I absolutely detest. Live action adaptations of cartoons. I absolutely detest it. Nothing I hate more than that. Because you can never get it right. When something is meant to be a cartoon, it just doesn't look right in live action, and vice versa. But when I think of Pebbles and Bam Bam, I much prefer the baby version, the cartoon baby, where Bam Bam has literal white hair and Pebbles has orange hair. But this cartoon, I mean, this live action movie in '94 with Rick Moranis dyeing his hair blonde to be Barney Rubble, and that guy from Roseanne as Fred or something like that. Um, but they made a live action adaptation of it. Now, I did not realize, but they were like Todd and Stacy like dolls of Pebbles and Bam Bam that I could have or should have had. And they both had plastic hair, with, painted on hairdo, and the girl's hair tie was painted Pebbles. And so, while they don't really look like the cartoon character that I see them as being, because I mean that's about ridiculous. I mean that would be like having a live action Rugrats wherein they look like actual children, and Tommy looks like a baby with no hair, or a live action Sophia the First where Cedric is just a generic old fart and he doesn't look anything like the boyish, cute cartoon character. Um, So, I really don't like live action forms of a cartoon, and part of the beauty of cartoons is that they're easier to draw than real people. And when you create conflicting info, with there being a real person drawing version of the character, then that's even more confusing than the gradual change in art style of the cartoon itself. So I do not like live action adaptations. I don't know that I ever saw that movie from beginning to end. I may have seen bits and pieces of it, but the point being, there was a Todd and Stacy type version in 1994. So there were quite a few boy dolls like Todd in the 90s. And there was of course Todd himself at the beginning of the 90s. Then there was the Bam Bam doll in '94, around the time Todd was discontinued. Then in '96 there was this Jonathan Taylor Thomas Pinocchio doll, a little taller than Todd. And he was, the boy that girls were crazy about. And then around '98 there was Anakin Skywalker, whose feet were his shoes. Then around 2000, they reintroduced the Todd and Stacy body as the Harry Potter kids. And from there on out, I think Todd was pretty much discontinued until he reappeared as a rare collector's item as Michael Banks with his sister Jane. Todd and Stacy as Jane and Michael Banks in Mary Poppins around 2007. And that was the last Todd doll that would ever be made, until a Max doll that was extremely rare with a Marie. He was kind of a reappearance in a different way around 2012. So every few years, you'd have another boy doll. But they were extremely rare and they were few and far between. And I feel like, like if you could go back in time, life didn't suck as much in the way that these boy dolls were available because they hadn't realized just how badly they would sell. And it's like that with a lot of things, I feel like, this mainstreaming of homosexuality has had the unintended consequences of ruining things that could have been great or fun or good. And I feel like boy dolls are a casualty of that. They're an unfortunate casualty of this acceptance of what I call sodomy or homosexuality. Um, because of the fact that it's like you can't, because people read such nasty things into everything is sexualized in some way. We cannot have the pure, simple innocence of a doll, that's an underage girl or even a boy, with a body very similar to a girl, without people seeing something nasty about it or making something nasty of it, such as, putting such a little boy in a dress or one of the girls' clothing, or, saying that he's gay, because his voice, for obvious reasons, isn't that of a man, be that because it's a little boy or a woman voicing him. Making something nasty of it, making him to be effeminate, um, because a lot of homosexuality, is goes hand in hand with pedophilia and sexualizing children. Um, and that's why, these people get so butthurt when they're told no, that they can't promote their agenda to children. You just don't hear a lot of drag queens fighting to read to old people at the nursing homes. You know why? Because the old people have already, their brains are already formed and deteriorating, and they don't have much longer to live. So it wouldn't really matter. They could go read to old people, and the old people would either just shrug them off, or, give them some choice words or whatnot. But they want to affect children. They want to make children question, now, who am I in this world? Vulnerable children like me, especially. And so I feel like, the boy dolls, they didn't sell. And that's sad because, they were very cute. What few of them existed, I see them as cute. And I guess I'll include a picture of that Dankin Pebbles and Bam Bam doll. But, I've always thought it would be fun to have a Pebbles and Bam Bam that I could dress in other clothing. Um, but because people have to read something nasty into everything has to be sexualized, everything has to be nasty in some way. You cannot have cute little innocent boy dolls, with the bodies that look somewhat like girls' bodies, because, people will read into that he's gay or he's effeminate, just because his body is more like that of a girl. Which you can't really do that much about your body, and especially as a child, when your body hasn't finished developing. The fact that a little boy's voice is high and that he can pass for a girl doesn't mean that he's gay. It just means he's not finished developing as a man. And I feel like it's a shame, that anyone would read something sexual into that, you know, and the makers behind the show would even run with that to an extent. So yeah, it's a shame that, we can't have nice things in a lot of ways. And like, this town used to not suck so much. I mean, there was a time when this town was much better. Like, if I'd have moved here, say 10 years ago or 15 years ago or 20 years ago, there was a public pool, there was a bowling alley, there may have once been a skating rink, but those things have all just pretty much disappeared because of COVID. And people's willingness to just comply with that and say, okay, I'll wear a mask, I'll stay home, I'll quit going eat out and just get takeout every night, or just cook my own food. That's cheaper. It all looks the same in the toilet the next day. um, and I feel like we've just lost so many things because of sin, that we don't even realize we're lost for that reason. And so yeah, this town used to be better. There used to be things available that I wish could still be there today. Shopping malls have all but disappeared. They're just a ghost of what they used to be. And just so many things, that people don't even realize. People don't see how that ties into, a lot of these things, the mainstreaming of homosexuality, making everyone aware of the gays, aware of the transgenders, aware of all these things that before we were aware of such things, people thought, yeah, you could have a boy doll and it wasn't anything nasty about it. It's just a cute little boy. But now it's like, if he's not a fully grown man, or, he's not manly McMuscle, which even that, is still rare. You can't manufacture a doll that could wear the girl's clothes because people are going to be nasty with them. They're going to simulate disgusting things. And so, yeah, I feel like sin has killed off a lot of the good things that we used to have. Good products we used to have, good places we used to have. People just accepting this more communistic view of the world, a very selfish view, a very, I'm going to do my thing no matter what it does to other people type view. Because more people have adopted that, I feel like we have lost a lot of things. We have a lower trust society. And so yeah, this video's gone on kind of long. And the other thing I want to end with is no one can gaslight me or try to tell me, that, because I honestly, believe, no one will convince me that there's no God. I believe there's a God and that he loves Texas, or he blessed Texas. Um, but, I believe that it might be the Holy Spirit. A lot of these revelations that I come by with these cartoons and these nasty things about them, like Howard Devil with Ellie on the end as the twins' as dad, and Lil DeVille is like Little Devil, get it? So she was like the sweet girl with devil in her name. Angelica was like the mean girl with angel in her name, and so on. But, I feel like it might be the Holy Spirit that's revealing these hidden nastiness or crudeness things. I guess you'd call them Easter eggs or something that people hid within children's media. I feel like it could be the Holy Spirit, working within me to reveal these things. It may not just be that I'm some kind of a genius or, I'm this special person with a special intelligence or gift, that I see these things for what they are, and I can't keep my mouth shut about them, so to speak, which is what they want me to do. They want me to doubt myself enough that I won't talk about it once I find these things. But I honestly believe it might be the Holy Spirit working through me, because I really might have been saved, or I'm pretty sure I was saved in like early March of 2008 when I started listening to Pastor Anderson. I went through the salvation thing, and it's hard to explain how, I got saved, but it's an odd thing. Around the time that I got saved was roughly the turning point wherein, number one, I never again had another year with 2 or more colds. Around, I think I was still 24, just a few more months. So right around, that time in my life, age 24 onward, I always had one cold or less. And I just gotten over a cold recently that was really bad. The only one I had at age 24 in February. So I never again had another year with multiple colds. And I also stopped feeling as much of a need. I no longer cut myself. The last time I ever cut myself was right before that happened. And of course, the last time I really harmed myself in any way was before I got the hysterectomy. Like, it was like a magical cure, for me wanting to harm myself. And, me wanting to cut myself ended around the time that I got saved, as I said, in 2008. And it was a very interesting time in my life. So I really do think that I might be saved, as in, I know that it's not by works. It's grace through faith, that I'm going to heaven. I'm trusting on God, not works, to get me to heaven. And so I might be saved. And if it's the Holy Spirit, telling me these things that are in children's media and, revealing to me these hidden nasty things, then there's nothing you can do to gaslight that knowledge out of my head. Or, it's a fight that you can't win to try to tell me that I'm wrong. Because if it's the Holy Spirit guiding me about these things, then I know that I'm right.